Hi, I'm Christian from ActionDrone Australia. I just want to go through today and do a visual reference on how we build or how you can build your Kitform AD1-2014. Firstly, we start with our flight controllers. So depending on which one you've chosen from us, we have the Super X or the NASA V2. Today we're going to use the Super X, so we'll put our NASA aside. Secondly, we have our Emax 4-in-1 ESC. These make the internal of our quad very just neat and tidy. It's not out of sight, out of mind. Generally like to keep all wiring, whether you can see it or not, nice and neat. This Emax unit makes it nice and easy to pull our ESCs in one small area. We have our T-motor carbon prop adapters. They'll be needed obviously to put onto our ActionDrone MT motors. These just allow obviously the carbon props to affix properly to the top there. They have a grip washer on them as well, just to stop the carbon from spinning on itself also. And we have our T-motor 10-inch props. And then we have our AD1 kit as you'll receive it. Everything is individually wrapped, all your booms, all that sort of stuff. Normally suggest the way that these are now, we do these, or now done, is that when you get everything, like I'll show you in a moment, we've packed them all individually so you don't get everything mixed up. In a minute I'll show you how to lay everything out just to keep it nice and neat. We also then have included in the AD1 our vibration-free gimbal. This will come to you no matter what pre-built. We obviously build these prior to you receiving them to make sure that they're correctly done and tested, so you don't have to worry about setting them up. They're tuned for the AD1 as well. As you can see, this one here has the mounts also pre-done, so you can put them into the vibration isolation rubbers at a later stage. Alright, we'll put that carefully aside for the moment and let's get ready to build. Okay, we've got everything aside that we don't need, just what we do need for the next couple of steps. First thing we're going to do is mount our motors to our motor mounts, which will come in this bag here. You'll recognize them. They look like these here. Then what we're going to do, we'll get our motors out. You also want to get the 4 screws per motor. They are the 3x6mm hex heads. Generally they're the second one in. Cut them open. See if you can do it quicker than I can. Okay, what we're just going to do is run our wire through the hole here. I like to make sure mine are all nice and pretty. Then we're going to line these screw holes up here with those 4 screws. You're going to run some kind of thread locker on it. Just a medium strength is fine, just to help against vibration, things rolling out. Carbon is normally pretty good once it screws down onto it, but recommend any screws that you use anywhere across the AD1 is definitely use thread locker. Okay, we'll do that. tightening up the last of our 4 motors. Okay, all done, ready for the next step. Okay, we've got all our motor mounts, or sorry, motor screws all done up nice and tight. Next thing we want to do is get our booms ready to hold those mounts. On the shorter ones, we only need to run 2 rubber O-rings on each end. To isolate the mount. On the rear, we want to run 3 on each boom. So we'll have 1 for the motor mount, sorry, 1 for the rear landing legs, 2 for the motor mounts on each side. I always do this first because I have a tendency to forget about putting the rubber on the rear landing skid and then having to take it all apart to do it. So with each motor, offset the pins at the end. Run them down into the tube. Be sure to hold the cable as you're going through at the same point, and then you'll find, if you're lucky, no, I'm not lucky, there we go, 3 down through the other end. Now we grab 2 of each mount, sit them on the top, flip our motor around. Now you just want to roughly get those in line, and then we drop our pins through. Grab another 2 on the bottom. Okay, when you've got each of the 4 booms at that stage, then grab each of your bottom plates. You just have to, as you screw through, you'll notice that the plate, the screw almost makes its own thread through the plate. That's nice because it'll actually hold it in that position while you go through and screw down your bolts. Then on each one of those plates we want to run a the 2.5 by 3 bolt, which you'll see here, there is quite a few of them here. They run through, you need to tighten those up. Then we need to do that to 1, 2, 3, 4 on each of the 4 booms. Okay, when you go through and tighten up all your bolts here, don't be worried about, you don't need to tighten them up so that the motor can't move. We actually need to align this motor later to make sure that it's level. You also want to make sure that the top of the motor is matching the top of the socket head screw there. So just roughly have them on the same plane as each other. So just to go through and make sure, like this one here. And you'll notice that they're facing in towards each other. Alright, so now what we want to do on our rear legs is mount our rear mounts. Now when we do this, just a little trick is mount, when this arm goes in, this is actually facing away from you, the front of the drone's here. This arm or boom will fold inwards like that. So in order for it to go in your case nice and just generally look presentable, I like to put the screws here, or the socket heads, on the outside. Wrong way around. So what will happen when you've put those on, they'll actually sit towards the outside. Right, we'll go through and I'll do the rest of those. I did just say to get the Emacs out. It's just so you can look and admire it, right, and then put it aside. Because what I forgot that we have to do next is the bottom gimbal stabilization or vibration isolator. So grab your bottom plate, get your bag with the dampener inside. Okay. First of all, what we're going to be using is 2 long screws and then 4 of those bolts and the bottom plate there. This stuff here, the remainder can just go to one side for the moment. Right, what we want to do now is through these 2 holes here, put our screws all the way through. You then want to get the nylox nuts on each side. We want to screw those down all the way to the bottom there so they're tight. Then we'll place this bottom isolation mount about 15mm in between this plate and the bottom plate here, so they'll sit just over halfway. The reason I use this socket set here is, being that these screws are so long, with that attached it normally stops about here. What I can actually do is hold that down there all the way and still be able to tighten on each one. So make sure whatever you use there, whether you use that or a small spanner, you know, just keep in mind that you've got that length there. Okay, secondly, we then put another 2 screws on here. They can go on. As we said earlier, these ones here, we want to screw down to probably just over about halfway on each shaft, or normally my indication is when I'm with this screw driver here, almost when I run out, so about there on each side. Yeah, so we want to just make sure that they're about 15 on each one. We then place that one there on, grab another 2 of our bolts, or nuts, sorry, and then and screw those in. Okay. That's that done. Then grab your top plate. Be sure to have the ribs top side. The top support of the gimbal, you want to run these nuts again either side. You'll notice that when all this goes on and is complete, there is some fine tuning if you wish to do, you can, in order to just get the gimbal to sit center of its movement. It generally doesn't move too much due to the airbags top and bottom, but it is nice if you're fussy or extra fussy to adjust those as well. More for looks than anything else. Now generally just want to keep screwing those down so that when this aligns here, you can safely get a full distance of your two remaining nuts onto the bottom there. Next we'll put the risers in for the gimbal control board. Now there are a few different gimbal boards that we've brought out. So no matter what we'll bring out, the measurements will be one of two. So what we want to do here is just basically, just as a check, is go through and see that you'll be able to see, as I get my thumbs out the way, that this blue board here sits in between the two holes there and match up to the other side. So when we go through and put our risers in, just make sure they're the ones we're going to utilize. So those two there, these two here. So we grab those four out of our packet. Also grab 4 of the small socket screws here. At the top, so a middle plate. Then add that riser on. And we'll go through now and we'll just do the other 3. Okay, next step is we want to run the 2 taller risers here that will support our top plate. And they will sit just here and here, same way that these 4 risers went in there. Okay, now we want to get two of the shorter screws that came with the gimbal kit, and then those there will mount further back on here. Sorry, the risers will mount a bit further back on these 2 points here. So same way we did these ones here, I'm going to go through and screw the 2 risers on here and here for the rear section of the vibration mount. Okay, something that I just realised I forgot to do is actually go through and thread lock all those bottom pins there. We don't need to worry about these two, they're nylocks. These ones here, I'll just take apart now quickly, go through just for peace of mind, and put a little bit of thread lock on there. Last 2 risers that we want to put in that hold the, secure the top deck are these 2 here. So the first one's beyond the Star Wars looking backdrop. Right, so we'll go ahead and do those. Remember, a little bit of thread locker. All done. The top section now we can put aside for the moment, and we'll go on to starting to plug in our wires to our Emacs. Alright, this is where the build starts to get a little bit, I'd say, messy in comparison to how clean we can keep our workstation. What we do is rather than run the ESC this way, we run it inside to protect the capacitors here. This will run up through the top deck section to our flight controller. These wires here we plug into our power supply. Different people like to do that different ways. Initially we were putting our XT60 plug on the bottom here, so we have that on the bottom and then plug your battery into it that way. Now a lot of people are opting for extending these wires here around to the back section, back around onto here, so then they can actually find that they can put, when their battery is sitting in underneath, that then they can plug back in this section here a whole lot easier rather than having to lift up, plug it in and drop it back down. So I'll let you decide on which way you want to do that way. This particular one we're going to try something new again, but when we're doing this we don't want to tape this down just as yet, because we still need to access the screws here for tying down our motors. Now the easiest way I find to do this is to lay everything out, as you can see. This here is, we want to put, let's say, the rounded edges towards the outside. We just sort of want to mock up how our motors are going to sit, and therefore work out how much wire length we need, because we'll actually cut these sections here off and screw them directly into the mounts here. Do not solder these ends. They are designed in this clamp here that the wire actually go flat and crimp in here. If you do solder them, you'll find that after a while, with vibration, as well as it not clamping properly, it will pull out, it will stop a motor. It won't end nice from there. So do not solder the ends. Generally what I use as a rule of roughly where my ESC is going to sit is just off these two holes here, where we have another couple of risers coming later on in the build. They sit backwards up, or sorry, sit upwards of here. So what I find works well is that when that's sitting here up against those risers and our battery goes in, it creates a little bit of a holder for the battery so it can't slide around. So sitting it there roughly, getting your power wires out the way regardless of what you want to do. Excuse me. We'll go through and mock up, as you can see here, that is the arc point, and the pivot point at the front here is the pivot. This is the arc. So this is effectively where our motors are going to, or our motor booms are going to pull in. If you have the ESC too far forward when you mount it, it will knock the end mount. So as I said, with that little rule, pull it back as far as you can up against those posts there. If you want to, all you need to do, you can go through now and just screw those with your small screws there. Bit of thread locker up against there, and then the ESC sitting hard up against it. So back to this. Oh. As you can see, we get wires starting to go everywhere now. Okay, the reason we want to map this out is, as I said before, we want to cut these wires here. So generally what I like to do is make an even zip tie looms, or this into loom sections up to here on both sides. Another good reason about swapping our ESCs around is we can literally put this motor, so as it's sitting here with us, facing the drone facing towards me, bottom left can go bottom left on the ESC, bottom right into bottom right, and so on. Then I'll go through later and show you further on in the build how we number these here to make sure that our motors are 1, 2, 3 and 4. Alright, now just a trick I'll show you is I'll put some pins in here just to keep the boom from not going any further from where it should. It also gives you a good idea on how long you need to trim these wires. So I generally put a double-sided tape or electrical tape over the top just to keep those down there. So when my top goes on, it's not squashing or pinching any of these wires. And then generally they're working it roughly like that. I can work out, okay, I need to cut them all at about that length there. Then we'll fold them under and put them in their screw tabs. So just simply cut off one by one. You don't have to know which one is which. And then on each of these here, if you just get a craft knife or a hobby knife and just score the edge on there, so you've got a centimetre or so to put into the connection on the ESC. This is one of the reasons here that we don't stick the ESC down, is because it's a lot easier to get to when you can move it around. So you just put those all the way in, tighten it up, grab the next one, tighten it up. Okay, so what we want to do is do that to all four, and just as I said, each time try and make them nice and neat, because afterwards we'll tie them down, cut the ends off. If you want to do it uniform, another trick is to go from the back of here and say I want to cut them all that long. Okay, then we'll go through and do the same with all four. Our motors are all wired in nice and neatly. We plug your battery in to the ESC. As you can see here, we've wired it in. That's ready for all our connections for now and in the future of things we might want to add on for our gimbal power and all that sort of thing. Once this is now plugged in to the ESC, obviously the ESC has power, therefore there's power coming out of here. So the way that we want to test to make sure our motors are going the right way without having to worry about putting a flight controller in is as we just plug one of these leads into each channel, turn our radio on.
Welcome to Toronto's.
Now when we power, we've got green light there for connected. When we power up, we want to check each motor's going the right direction. If it's going the wrong direction, then we just change 2 out of 3 of these wires. We'll get it spinning the other way. Thank you. So as we power up, make sure you plug it in properly. Alright, now that's going this way. it should be going the other way. So we'll wire these two here around the other side. Then quick reference is whatever this one's doing, the diagonal should be doing the same. So once again, that's going this way, we want it to be going the other way. So now that we've tested that one, we can then put in another one. As we're doing this also, it'll give us which motor is which. Okay, now that we've got all our motor wiring into our ESC, we now want to work out, number one, that the motors are spinning in the right direction for each one. We also want to work out which motor is which. So we want it to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And we need to mark that on here, on each of these wires, so when we put them into our flight controller later, the flight controller knows which motor is which. So at the moment all we're going to do is throttle position, sorry, not throttle position, rotation. So the way to do that is to have your radio bound to your receiver. First of all, you power up. When it beeps, the ESC says that it's ready to go. Sometimes it can take a little while. Maybe a long while.
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
So now when we accelerate, so now that it's tuned in and finished chiming, as we accelerate, we can see which way the motor's going. Now at the moment, that motor is going this way, so we want to change 2 out of these 3 wires into the ESC to get it going the other way. So that one there is motor 2, so we'll make a mark on here, because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, that this is motor 2. So we're going to put just 2 dashes on there to say that's motor 2. Now when we unplug that one,
telemetry lost,
and we plug in our next signal wire into the signal port,
telemetry recovered.
There's 2 beeps there because what we need to do
telemetry lost.
Let's try that again. We'll put the power in first, then the signal wire from your next one. You don't want to be free revving these motors for too long. It's not good for them. Right, so now that we've got power in, the only reason we're replugging number 2 into the other port here is just to make sure that our that we've got power here. So number 1 now, when we've put that up, okay, so that's motor 1, 2, 3. We'll put a mark on this one here, 1, 2, 3. Put another signal wire in. Should hear a chime up of another motor or ESC. So So that's motor 4. It's now started up. You can see them twitching as they start. So as I throttle that, once again we check our rotation. We also mark that as number 4. Now our last one, which is number 3. Sorry, be our third one in. Should be motor 1. Yep, so now as we power that, you can see that's on as well. So we'll just give that a mark of 1 dash. So now with that, we've gone through and found that we have all our motors labelled. We've also found out what the rotation is and isn't correct on each one. Okay, so we found out that this motor's spinning the wrong way. So I just want to turn this over, your ESC. We'll undo 2 of those plugs. Now when we repower number 2 there, we should have that spinning in the right direction.
Telemetry recovered.
Yep, spinning around this way, so it's spinning in the right direction. To make it easier, what we can do is just go opposites. So now that you've labelled this motor, this is number 4. So 2 and 4 should spin the same direction, 1 and 3 should spin the same direction. So towards me now, it's going clockwise. We want motor number 4 to be going clockwise as well. So we'll just
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
power up again. Put number 4 in. Sometimes you may have to give it a little bit of signal for it to register. Now we want this one to be going clockwise as well. Okay, that's going anti-clockwise at the moment. So we need to change these 2 wires over again. Only once have I been lucky enough to get them all right at the same time. I think Daryl, or Mr. Stark as I call him, I think he gets it right every time. Only him and Chuck Norris. Okay, so we should be, now that we've swapped those over, should be going clockwise. Yep, clockwise on there. So now for the other 2, we want them, for 1 and 3, we want them to be going anti-clockwise. So plug in again. Yep, number 1's correct. We'll try number 3. Once again, should be anti-clockwise. Yep, that's spinning anti-clockwise. So we're done. Our motors are labelled and they're spinning in the right directions. Right, all our motors spinning in the right direction and labelled. Now we just want to go through and just make sure that all these screws here are nice and tight. You also want to just lightly pull on each one, just to make sure they're not going to work themselves out. Okay, now that that's done, get some double-sided tape. And just stick down back section there and there. Then when you're mounting it, as we said, mount it back as hard as you can up against the risers here, and just make sure it's square. Okay, it's that mounted. Next we need to mount and just tidy up our wiring here, get it run neatly over the top of the ESC. Alright, our ESC wiring's nice and neat, stuck down. I normally put a zip tie here just to keep everything grouped together, not tight, but just enough to keep everything neat. Excuse me. Okay, all our wiring's done, it's down, it's neat. The zip tie here is just to group all the wires together. It's not tight, it's just there to group everything together and make sure it's nothing too much is moving around. Generally, as you play with your AD1 and you put more things on it, and lights, cameras and all that sort of thing, it's nice to have all this wire here out of the way so you can feed through easily both the bottom section and top sections here. Just make sure your wiring here is clean and out the way, because soon to be is the step where we'll actually run these up through here. So you just want to make sure you've got as much as you can to get back to the flight controller at the back. So from here, all our accessory wiring, depending on how many ports we want to use. This is for our gimbal, so that will need to come up through, and maybe one for our flight controller. The others for cameras, FPV systems and all that sort of thing, they'll stay in underneath in between the two plates until we need them later. So what we want to do is grab 4 wires here, feed them up through. Now, one thing I've realised I didn't do earlier was put the front stands on, because I normally do them afterwards. So these here, your front stays generally go in underneath and keep the front of the 81 out of the dirt. You can put them in afterwards. You can also access both sides of the holes, of the bolt and nut through these top sections here. So as I said, I'm in the habit of doing it the other way. You will need a set of tweezers though, just to drop the bolt in through the bottom plate, but I can show you how to do that afterwards. Alright, so once that's down and on, we then want to grab the longer bolt here and a washer. The trick is with these washers, so it doesn't scratch your pretty carbon, is a washer has a top and a bottom on it. You'll see one side will have a radius edge, both inside diameter and outside. So what we do is to keep that nice and so it doesn't scratch here, is that face, the smooth face, goes up against the carbon. So it's just a matter of finding the hole on the top point, on the pivot, and then the secondary one on the arc, and then going through and almost just sandwiching it all together. Then what you want to do is hold it, we'll turn it upside down, and we'll put our, once again, washers around the correct way, and then button it up. Alright, I'll get started on that. I've gone through and put all these screws in, put our washers the correct way so they don't scratch the carbon. Also on the underside we do the same, so invert or turn around or make sure the correct way the washers as well. Then I find the easiest, or before I get into that, let's make sure that we get 2 screws here and here need to be done. They'll go into the risers in the bottom. Okay, from here I normally like to be careful, but you can actually open up and have you can go through, and I normally start in the center and work outwards, just lightly nipping up the bolts. As I said, they don't need to be too tight just yet. We can do that once it's all together. I normally have the outer bolts, this one here, a little bit tighter than the pivot points. It's personal preference how tight you do them. They need to be a certain tightness so it won't fold in too easily, but then again, if you do happen to down it, it hits a tree or hits the dirt or really strong grass, the booms can actually fold in and help protect and absorb some of that impact. Okay, should have them to the point where they're nice and stiff. That one's probably a little bit too much. Now, what I forgot to do earlier, sorry, deliberately meant to do later, is our 2 front legs. Okay, what we want to do with these is grab your tweezers. And we want to drop our bolt in there, bolt, washer, nut, careful you don't do them up too tight when you're twisting around like I did there. You may scratch carbon. And be ready for our flight controller and radio electronics to put in. Okay, next is our installing our flight controller. As we said earlier, we're going to use the Super X. So in your Super X box, get your I/O, and your flight controller. Then we have our GPS that will sit up on our top deck, and a bunch of wiring and an LED indication light. So those aside, the most important thing here to get right is the flight controller itself. It will sense and obviously send signal to the motors anytime that it's not level, and including when it's not level. So we need to make sure also that it's sitting on the X here in the frame, which is the center of the gravity on the AD1. So what we do is normally double side tape that, and we stick that down to there. We've got to make sure that the arrow is facing forward. So let's do that. A couple of things that you have to be wary of here is that ideally we'd all like to put, you know, the I/O as close up as here as we can, but we've got a couple of things we need to allow space for. One is our wiring here, and the secondly is a few wires that come in with Super X that help the two units talk to each other. So that's one of them that will go in between. One more missing. Here it is. The data cable here can be plugged in and out. This cable is purely to communicate along with this one here to talk to your computer, so you can use the black box, play around with settings, gains and all that sort of thing. I generally wire this or plug this in so it's in and is ready to go, and that simply just goes into here. It is a squeeze, but it does go in neatly. And then this here at the end of the build will sit in there, and easily accessible to plug that into your computer, rather than finding, once you have all the other wires and bits and pieces, to put into the back there. So at the moment we'll just get that one out the way. A few things to consider no matter what flight controller you're using is spacing everything out, and I think takes a bit more time, especially for something new or a different controller to go in, for each person to work out, okay, I want this here, that there. The most important thing is your flight controller, as we said before, in the center. When all these motors are folded out, you can run a metal ruler from this motor to that motor and this one to that one, and you will find that that X is the intersection. Therefore, that's why it's sitting in the middle. Other things to consider is your indication LED. Now, you're normally looking at this from on the ground upwards, so you generally want to make sure that you can see it, whether it be face down, if you're constantly at high altitude. We find that even sideways is quite a good indicator for still sitting on the floor, when being on the ground, and seeing that light flash well enough. Now, we normally place ours here in Australia. We've seen it to be mounted on the side of the rear boom as well, even sitting in underneath here. So look, that's one thing to organise yourself and how you want to do it. There is one 3-pin plug on Super X, and I won't go too much into Super X, but there is one 3-pin plug, so that one goes into there. There's then the communication cable from the I/O to the flight controller. That is a 4-pin. So we go 4-pin to 4-pin. And then lastly, we have our GPS and compass. Now, with everything I build, the first time it does take me quite a while, no matter how much I think I know about it, because I generally like to plan out where wires are going to run, how long they are. I have noticed with the X-Aircraft product that sometimes this unit here may be sitting closer to the 9 than it is the 12, sometimes closer to the 5. So every quad we build is different. I just make sure by getting our top plate, just lining it up here, knowing that that's going to sit about here. So as we can see there, that's quite a long cord, and I'm not a fan of sticking it here and having excess wiring and all that sort of thing on there. But we can do some tricky things as far as coming in underneath. Once again, that's up to you where you do it and how you run your wire. Okay, the last thing for Super X is, or for most things, is powering your I/O. On Super X, B is for battery, and where we had our wires come up through the middle to the top deck on our AD, I noticed for the NASA the cable supplied is long enough. For X-Aircraft it's not, purely because this flight system is generally on X-Aircraft products. But it's a simple extension piece from this one to this one here, which when we do our ready to fly systems, we do for you. Be aware, if you are making your own, you will need to have an extension piece there, or cut and solder here and join into that one. As we said, when this goes around, it's tucked out the way. Next thing we want to do is grab our motors here. So our indicators we marked earlier as 1, 2, 3 and 4. So we plug these in. The signal is at the top, which is our white wire. I always start with number 2 because it's the power. Number 3. Number 1. before. So as we can see there, like, you know, there's some wire management to be done there already. Keep in mind we want to keep space there for your transmitter at the back. So generally, whether it be like that, whether you turn it around, mount it differently, once again it's all personal choice. Generally I try and bring that here, now that we can see that with our plugs in, how close we can actually bring it up to the flight controller, and generally there's enough space there at the back. Some people put it on their top deck, that's fine as well. And last one, working out exactly where you want your LED. So from here back, that's down to your flight controller. The next thing for us to do for the build of the AD1 is put our gimbal on. Alright, so if you take your gimbal out of its wrap, this cord here, just leave aside for the moment. Right, so first thing we want to do is grab these springs here and place them over the top of our main support bar. Sorry, I forgot that I was speaking then. We want to grab the gimbal itself. Just be careful with the board here as we pull it through. Okay, so we're going to pull it up and over until it sits over the two stays here. Let's get that out of the way for the moment. Then as it's sitting there, we want to come around and we'll grab our brass section here. On the bottom, in the middle of the gimbal, there's an exposed stud. Just want to screw that in. Okay, now when aligning this, we want to actually push the socket head screws there. We want to try and feed them neatly into the tops of the cushions here, like so. Then we grab one of our small socket heads through the carbon washer and then into the base of this riser. This just stops the whole mechanism moving too far. Alright, from there we have our top piece. Once again, same with that, just line it up with the bolts, the top of the cap heads, socket head. Then we screw those down. Okay, then our next step is retrieve our springs. Okay, then what we want to do is take the bottom of the screw, sorry, the spring hook there, and put it onto each gold section here. What that does is that keeps the front of the gimbal up and level. As you can see there, gives it an independent mount from the rest of the quad. Go ahead and do that. Okay, now what I did there too, just make sure you don't do it. Make sure this cable is inside the two springs, support springs either side. Then now we get 4 of our small socket head. Actually, before we do that, let's plug it in. Okay, so the wiring connector you've put into your main battery feed. Connect that. Once again, I also like to run this down in underneath. Just to keep all the wiring on the underside, or as much as you can on the underside of the board. Ain't gonna work. This wire here and this section here is actually wired into our receiver at the back, sorry, transmitter at the back. So this cable here, so I generally actually slide down in underneath. And just make sure you plug it the right way. Signal, signal, power, power, earth, earth. And that can run down the side. You can wire that into the channel on the radio. Okay, so when you've fiddled around, got all that neat, as you can see here, I've just changed the cord to go over the top. We normally zip tie that one down there later just to keep it neat. To make sure the gimbal is, or how it is, should be seating correctly, is that both of these pins should be in those airbags on both sides, and also your mount here, when it's sitting with the weight of the camera in it, you want it just off the bottom there. Doesn't need to be hitting, just below would be ideal. So yeah, as you can see there, nice and neat. Battery sits in here, there. To hold the battery in, normally use some Velcro battery stays. Last thing to do is put on our carbon top plate. I'm taking a lot of pauses in between talking. I don't normally talk like that. Maybe I do. I forget. So, that one around there. Line up those there. We'll have 4 Allen key heads in. There I go again. Isn't she beautiful? So next thing we want to do after this is, depending on what props you're running, you have your normal prop stays or your carbon ones to suit a carbon fibre blade. Before you do that and put all that sort of stuff on, what I find it makes it a lot easier is to get your motors level, is using a small spirit level. Mine has escaped me. And when you have the AD1 at full open, we want to make sure it's sitting on level ground. And with the spirit level across each of the motor tops here, you want to get those bang on level. Now when you're tightening up your motors, only tighten the two brackets up on either side. We want to leave about 1/2 mil in between. Don't tighten them up too much, obviously not too loose. They've got to be tight enough that they're not going to move around. Then from there on we put our mounts, props on. Oh well, we might as well do that now. Right, next is the pretty. Alright, so what you get in the T-motor box is, these are designed for an MN series motor. Being that these MT motors are a pancake style, and we need to, as we discussed, run that other style mount here, we don't actually run these. There's no provision for the center screws to go through on those, so that's why when it comes with those carbon ones, they run just a washer and nut on them. Now in each pack you'll get a pair, clockwise and a counterclockwise. I always remember that the unit facing towards me, the drone, this will be for the motor to be going in the right direction, it's anti-clockwise, and this one here will be clockwise. In the new T-motor packs, there's actually some matching stickers. With those, if you find that the way that you want to package or carry your AD1 and you want to take your props off, especially on the rear, is that you can match orange sticker to boom to blade. Makes it a lot easier, you don't have to think about it all the time. After a while it does become second nature. If you get this one right, that one's the excuse me, that one's the opposite, sorry, the same, and then these two are the opposite. Well, I'll go through and put those on. Okay, that's an AD1 built. Next I'll go through, I'll show you how to plug in the rest of the flight controller. We'll link that up, we'll fly it. I'll also find my spirit level, and we can get these levels done on the props. Okay, I have decided now the after building this afternoon that I'm going to, because I did such a good job, I'm going to take that myself. Means I will be selling my original AD1. So if you're interested, let me know.